Australian, Sir Sidney Cotton. 1894 to 1969. Pioneer airman inventor in World War I and II. Part inspiration for Ian Fleming's James Bond. Australian, Sir Sidney Cotton. 1894 to 1969. Pioneered the SidCot flying suit in World War I. Colour film between the wars. And aerial spy reconnaissance photography in World War II. Colleague of Ian Fleming and part inspiration for Fleming's character James Bond. The book left-hand side was a key resource for this video. Sidney Cotton was born on the 17th of June, 1894, on a huge cattle station, thousands of acres, at remote Guganga, Queensland, Australia. It can be found from present-day YBP and Whitsunday Coast Airport, 1 nautical mile, 53 degrees. Note, the reason for using this twin beach aircraft will become apparent later in the video. Cotton's father had emigrated from the UK years earlier and married an Australian girl. He loved handling horses and cattle and travelled all over Queensland, droving cattle from one station to another. Cotton's father hoped that the love of the land would be passed down to his son, but as time went by, it was clear that young Cotton's interests were in engineering, aviation, and innovation. The cattle station was not far inland from what is today one of Australia's premier holiday and tourist destinations, the Whitsunday Islands, and, further out, the Great Barrier Reef. In 1900, the Cottons moved to a new 10,000-acre station, which they called Hidden Vale. It can be found from present-day YFIH Forest Hill Airport, 8 nautical miles, 133 degrees. Cotton had very fond memories of his time at Hidden Vale. The Cottons' original homestead is now Spice's Hidden Vale Luxury Retreat. The Cottons, including Sidney's younger brother and sister, built a beautiful house at Hidden Vale, on top of a hill, with outstanding views. Unfortunately, years after they left, it burnt down. In 1910, the Cottons sold Hidden Vale and moved to the UK. Here Cotton was introduced to, and fell in love with, aviation. He built model planes and frequented London Brooklands Airfield, then the cradle of aviation in the UK. Cotton recalled years after, "I could not understand why the pilots kept pulling out little boxes and striking matches, until I was told that they were holding the match up to test the strength of the wind for flying. In those days a breeze that would blow out a burning match was too much for all but the most daring and skillful aviator." In 1912, the Cottons returned to Australia and happily repurchased Hidden Vale. Cotton was sent to be a jackaroo at Dalkeith Station in New South Wales, which can be found from today's YCSI, Cassili's Rother Airport, 1 nautical mile, 95 degrees. It was clear to the Dalkeith Station manager that Cotton was more interested in engineering and aviation than running cattle sheep stations. He encouraged Cotton to follow his passions. Dalkeith Station homestead is now the small town of Cassili's. While at Dalkeith Station, with the encouragement of the station manager, Cotton successfully built a motor car. It was probably the first Australian-designed and built car. With the advent of World War I, Cotton sailed to the UK in 1915 to join the Royal Navy Air Service, RNAS. At the RNAS training station at Chingford, he was mistaken as being ready to try for his flying ticket rather than as being a beginner. After a couple of circuits in a Farman Longhorn trainer with an instructor, he was sent off solo. He did well and got his ticket without any prior flying experience. Chingford Airfield or RNAS, Chingford was a Royal Naval Air Service airfield in northeast London, used in World War I. It is now the site of William Girling Reservoir. It was in use from December 1914 to November 1920. This is where Cotton became a pilot in 1915. In the UK, 3 days after his first solo flight at Chingford, Cotton was posted to the Central Flying School at Upavon Airfield, now a British Army establishment, flying Royal Aircraft Factory BE-2s. 3 weeks later he passed his flying, navigation, plotting and Morse code tests. Note, the aircraft here is an SE-5, similar to the BE-2. Cotton was then posted to active duty at a BE-2 flight at Dover. He had only 5 hours flying experience. Cotton saw much active service in Europe in World War I in a range of aircraft, such as frigates, as shown here. On one occasion, frozen pilots returned from a mission, and one remarked that Cotton did not seem cold at all. Cotton later realized that he had not had time to get out of his work overalls before taking off, and the thick coating of oil and grease on his overalls turned them into an airtight bag and trapped his body heat. Grasping he had the basis of a new type of flying suit, Cotton headed for London and arranged for a clothing manufacturer to make up several test suits to his design. The suits were fur-lined with an outer layer of light waterproof material, and the key to their warmth was the insulating layer of airproof silk sandwiched in between. His names formed the basis of the SidCot trademark, which he registered. Hardly an Allied pilot in both wars did not wear a SidCot suit. Even the famous World War I German fighter pilot, Manfred von Richthofen, the dreaded Red Baron, after he crashed to his death in France, was found to be wearing a British SidCot flying suit beneath his leather flying jacket. Cotton accepted no money from the design, evolved as it was, to assist the war effort. The SidCot flying suit was the big invention. But Cotton also introduced numerous other innovations during World War I. His de Havilland IV biplane was the first Allied aircraft to be camouflaged. He also devised specially mounted upward-firing Lewis guns to take advantage of the weak defensive position directly beneath the giant German Zeppelins. His own Sopwith 1.5 Strutter sported an extra rearward-firing machine gun for defensive action. In recognition of his inventiveness, in 1917 he was posted to a special unit at Hendon, UK, testing new machines and equipment. Cotton was having run-ins with senior British military officers and officials. Although he was generally right, his straightforward Australian approach did not suit some. Despite pleas from brother officers, Cotton resigned his commission and left the RNAS shortly before World War I ended. Cotton volunteered for the Royal Australian Flying Corps but was turned down. He found out years later that the British Admiralty had marked his records, difficult temperament and unsuitable for uniformed service. The Australian authorities of 1918, subservient to the home country, could not ignore such advice. For 18 years after World War I, Cotton was involved in much pioneering. Aerial spotting for the Newfoundland sealing fleet. Aerial photographic survey for map-making. Search and rescue operations in Newfoundland and the Arctic. And, most importantly, development of color photography while heading up the Dufay Color Company, for which he often flew on business throughout Europe in his twin-engine Lockheed 12A, registered GAFTL. This role and this aircraft would soon lead Cotton to his greatest success. In 1938, British intelligence looked for a private pilot prepared, by means of clandestine aerial photography, to gather information on military targets in Germany, Italy and the Middle East. War was looming on the horizon. Cotton often flew on business throughout Europe in his twin-engine Lockheed 12A Electra Junior and was well known there. It was an ideal cover. He immediately agreed to help and commenced operations in February 1939. Note, there's no Lockheed Electra Junior yet for MSFS, so we'll use a sort of similar twin beach. For the next 6 months, Cotton crisscrossed Europe and the Middle East, his specially concealed cameras recording details of Axis military and industrial installations. Once over the Siegfried Line, a German Messerschmitt fighter rushed up to intercept the Lockheed. Cotton had not forgotten his wartime skills, and by cunningly using the sun, he escaped over the French border. Cotton's most audacious spy flight was right under the eyes of the Germans. While on a business visit to Berlin, he befriended the business manager of Luftwaffe boss Hermann Göring, who introduced Cotton to the commandant of Tempelhof Airport. The commandant wanted to take a flight in Cotton's Lockheed. Though nagged by the fear of a possible Gestapo trap, the chance to fly outside the strictly enforced air lanes and take photographs was too good to miss. After finally getting rid of the initial incompetent French involvement in the spying with their massive camera and wish to run everything, Cotton adapted his hidden wing-mounted much smaller Leica cameras to take 250 exposure rolls of film. The cameras were loaded and shot by small electric motors. Cotton's self-concocted system was operated by a tiny button concealed under his pilot seat. The Allies were particularly interested in targets in the Mannheim area of the Rhine River, an area banned to all but German military aircraft. So Cotton took the plunge with the Germans. I had a favorite aunt who always raved about the beautiful Rhine at Mannheim. I should like to fly down there. Next day, the Gestapo and Luftwaffe authorities gave their permission. The Lockheed's leisurely flight path took the plane over numerous airfields and military establishments. As the unsuspecting commandant sat alongside him in the co-pilot's seat, Cotton casually dangled one hand on the edge of his seat and took shot after shot. On the return flight to London, Cotton pulled off yet another daring trick. Taking advantage of cloud buildups, Cotton supposedly got lost, strayed well north of the air corridor, and photographed the German defense installations along the infamous Siegfried Line of West Wall. Back home, the invaluable film was processed. The new automatic Leica system had worked perfectly. As Cotton said, of course it worked perfectly. The cameras were German-made. During these flights, he thought up many innovations that drastically improved the quality of the photographs and their interpretation. War was only a few weeks away when Cotton headed off on one of his last intelligence missions, destination Berlin. Under cover of establishing a Jufecolor agency in Germany, he landed at Tempelhof and was immediately surrounded by jackbooted Nazi soldiers. Anticipating their immediate arrest, Cotton and his co-pilot stepped out of the aircraft. To their amazement, the soldiers were formed in a guard of honor and saluted the two airmen. Their host at Tempelhof, it turned out, was a close friend of Luftwaffe chief Hermann Göring. Cotton gathered that Göring had different views on the impending war to those held by Hitler. On the spur of the moment, he invited Göring to fly with him to the UK for an informal meeting with Prime Minister Chamberlain. Göring accepted. London agreed. But then Germany and Russia signed a non-aggression pact. Word arrived from Göring that the meeting was off. It was too late, war was inevitable. Cotton stayed on in Berlin, hoping to gather further intelligence. His German friend begged him to leave before it was too late. Cotton hung on. Then London said it was time to leave. Tempelhof was crammed with Messerschmitt fighters as Cotton and co-pilot taxied for takeoff. Influential Nazi friends had wangled special permission for his return flight. Once airborne, the Leica cameras were refitted. He photographed the German fleet at Wilhelmshaven on the way home. His was the last civilian plane out of Berlin. When World War II was declared, Cotton was approached by the RAF for advice on aerial photography. The IFS photo reconnaissance squadrons, equipped with slow-flying Blenheim bombers and antiquated cameras, tried to photograph seaports on the occupied Dutch coast, but they had not taken one worthwhile picture. "Give me a fast aircraft and I'll get them for you," was the typical Cotton reply. In vain he argued that their photographic system was outdated. Intent only on picking his brains and refusing to employ him in uniform, he was only asked to help brief the IF pilots the next day. His frustration and anger at their short-sighted stupidity led to his next move. An hour after leaving the conference, he took off in his aircraft from Haston Aerodrome. He was supposedly on a local flight. Reaching the coast, he set off across the North Sea for Holland. Soon he was dodging in and out of cloud at 3,300 meters over the ports of Flushing and Muiden, with one eye on the ground and the other looking out for German fighters. By late that night, he had processed an album full of perfect enlargements of the target areas. The IF, briefing at 10 a.m. next day, proceeded badly on similar lines to the previous day. So Cotton dropped his album on the table and asked, "Are these the sort of photos you want?" The answer came, "These are first class, but we couldn't expect this sort of quality in wartime." "When did you take them?" "At 3:15 p.m. yesterday," Cotton replied. The room exploded with anger and indignation. Cotton left and slammed the door behind him. Next morning the IF Air Chief Marshal called Cotton. "The IF will never live down what you did yesterday, but I congratulate you on your audacity. We needed those pictures desperately." Thus it was that following consultation with Sir Winston Churchill, Cotton was asked to form his own top-secret special unit, answerable only to the Chief of Operations and bypassing normal red-tape channels. His unorthodox methods achieved brilliant results, but would persistently run him foul of inter-service jealousies and the stagnant thinking of many old-school senior officers. He was responsible for the two-broke window, which greatly improved the pilot's vision and over 100,000 men during the war. His special process increased the speed of his photo-ready Spitfires by 65 km per hour and was used on other special-purpose RAF aircraft. The camouflage scheme he devised to hide aircraft in the sky for special work became the RAF standard. Cotton's revolutionary idea of photography for high-speed, high-flying aircraft was strongly resisted by most of the so-called experts. But it was soon adopted by the RAF's later famed photo reconnaissance unit, which had grown from Cotton's tiny work. RAF photographic intelligence began through the pressure, assistance and enterprise of Sidney Cotton, wrote the post-war London Times. Cotton's Australian individualism made him refuse to be hamstrung by bureaucracy. It led him to espouse various noble causes after the war, such as helping the 18 million starving people of Hyderabad surrounded by the aggressive might of India, or bringing to the British government a better understanding of Arab problems. His talents took him all over the world. His life continued to be full of excitement as it was of incident. He was just as much at home with the seal hunters of Newfoundland as with the politicians, statesmen and members of royalty he so frequently met. Cotton's character was personified by what he told his friends, 80% of my time in the war was fighting the boneheads in the Air Ministry. So only 20% was left to perfect the photographic unit and fight the Nazis. Despite the boneheads, Cotton was awarded an OBE in 1941 for his wartime work. In 1969, Cotton wanted to return home to Australia with his family. It was not to be until after his death. The Aussie outback man, airman adventure inventor, who had helped win World War II with a camera, died from a heart attack on the 13th of February, 1969, in Sussex, UK, aged 74. In a glowing obituary, the London Times said, edited, Cotton was a most remarkable man of his generation. He did not get enough credit for he was always cutting corners and treading on toes to get his revolutionary ideas accepted, and had the annoying habit of proving experts wrong. They did not love him for putting up ideas which they initially rejected, but were ultimately obliged to adopt. He leaves a wife and 2 children and a record of individualistic, unconventional behavior second only to his courage and resourcefulness. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed.